There was an uncanny stillness in the room. They hinted at the chaos and strain along Stephen's face as he abruptly grabbed the dark eyes and a hefty vase from the table suddenly and furiously. He swung it aita. I hear the sound of glass hitting me with vicious power. It echoed in, chattering against my skull. The anguish flooded the tiny apartment. My head as my eyesight became hazy and I retracing my steps. The last thing I remembered it was falling to the ground. Hello, before everything turned to black. I'm Sophia, and I'm 32 years old. I believe I had it figured out. Married Stephen years ago, and we lived together. I had a comfortable apartment and a lovely worked for an advertising agency in the neighborhood. Steph had a steady job at the agency. Sales at a company that sells sports nutrition. On the surface, life appeared to be ideal. Intended to save money, purchase a home, and when we began a family, everything was changing. As planned, or at the very least, I believed it to be so until Stephen's sister Kelly arrived to spend the entire day with us. Began simply enough. Kelly had her husband passed away recently in a terrible. Stephen's parents were involved in an automobile accident. Worried that she would be by herself with her, they recommended she stay with the 3 kids. With us temporarily, only until she was able to return to her feet. I wasn't really excited with the concept, but I recognized that Kelly Washi was in mourning and needed assistance when Stephen was excited when he arrived, held his sister in a close hug. Isn't it wonderful to have bags inside? His expression lit up as he asked me this. I grinned as he assisted the kids in getting comfy. I'm sure it will be pleasant to spending time together, but in my heart I was concerned because I worked a full-time job and the apartment wasn't particularly roomy. How long could we last with 3 more individuals living in our home? I initially attempted to make the most of it. I assisted Kelly in cooking for the kids, providing food for everyone and cleaning up afterward them, but after a few weeks, there was no indication that Kelly intended to depart. Meanwhile, Stephen seems to believe that staying in was undoubtedly a smart move. Sophia, Kelly is going through a lot, Stephen would comment after I shared my frustration. We must simply assist her. Over a short period of time, longer than as the months went by, Kelly Washi didn't feel comfortable enough. Try your best to find employment, and rather, she allowed her children to roam freely in the walls of the unit were covered in furniture is soiled with crayon marks, overflows, and the plants I used to cherish had been too frequently knocked down to account. But the most painful thing was Stephen's demeanor didn't appear to observe the weight I was bearing. Failed to recognize the additional effort I was doing to maintain the household's functionality. His only concern was ensuring Kelly and Sophia, Kelly's children, were content. Stephen stated that he dislikes spicy cuisine. As I served dinner this evening, could you create something else? That I kept by biting my lip. Stephen, I'm trying my hardest not to snap. I spent the entire day working, and Kelly has been with the kids all day and is fatigued. Day as well, and he snapped back that she's exhausted. Lacks the time to prepare meals, therefore it was that the same dispute each night. I recognized Kelly's difficulties. But even though I was exhausted, Stephen continued to requesting that I give up more of myself. The tipping moment for her came one after supper that evening. I was cleaning the dishes as soon as Stephen entered. His face was set with resolve. Sophia, we must speak. I cleaned my hands in preparation for another dispute. What has Kelly been searching for? He spoke in a voice for jobs in the city. She is excited, and thinking about my heart sank as I decided to stay here forever. What do you mean by remaining here? Well, Stephanie went on to say that she's discovered some favorable prospects, and the presence of children here simply made Cassie looked at him as if it made sense for her to stay. I couldn't believe what I heard. We don't have room for 7 people, Stephen. Residents here, and how about me? What about the other one? Our plans? Statement made by Stephen as though he hadn't even heard me. I believe you ought to give up your work and remain at home to assist with the children. The words were like a slap in the face. Are you serious about my job? Kelly has to work, and someone needs to look after this. Stephen remarked as though it were the only rational thing in the world. Is the phrase, fair, kept repeating in my head, making me angry because I had put forth a lot of effort to advance my job so that I can be self-sufficient, and Stephen now anticipated that I would toss everything away to work as a babysitter full-time. For the kids of his sister, I shook my won't be leaving my work to take care of another person's children. Stephen, I don't think his expression is fair. Darkened expectations are unfair. Kelly will manage everything alone. She is a single mother, thus we must encourage her. I could sense her rage simmering inside of me. I've been helping her take care of her. I cook, and I clean. Months with her children while she waits on. When is it enough to sit on the couch and watch TV? You're being self-centered, Stephen, he yelled. were meant to take this family. I couldn't believe they took care of each other. What I heard was that I've given up being selfish. What about doing everything to make this work? What about our marriage and my needs? Stephen's expression twisted in rage. Hands balled into fists. Perhaps if you weren't so self-centered that you'd recognize that this is in everyone's best interests. Then, before I could even comprehend, she grasped the vase, wondering what was going on. Swung it at me from the table. The glass hit it instantly. Breaking as it made contact with my head, my cranium exploded with pain and stumbled back and struck the floor with a forceful blow. While lying on the chilly, hard floor, I could hardly make out the image swam. Stephen is standing over me, the broken fragments of the vase strewn all over my head ached, and I could sense the warmth. A drop of blood trickling over the side of my face, his face seemed unreal. Even though I was observing the action as it happened, emanating from Sophia, Stephen's body voice faltered, but he remained motionless to assist. He simply stood there frozen, unable to observe a mixture of remorse and incredulity in his eyes, but it was already too late. Attempted to talk, but what I said came out in a faint murmur. Stephen, what did you do? You took a step. Back his trembling hands. I didn't mean. My head was pounding and I was having trouble staying aware that I needed assistance. I had to get you out there and gather all your strength. I pushed myself up slowly after leaving, my mind spinning. I dropped to my hands and knees. Every time you moved, the pain was overwhelming, but I was unable to remain on the floor. I was able to get myself together somehow, grasping the edge of the up to my feet at the counter for assistance. Stephen was still standing there with a pallid face, as though he was unsure of what I needed to do. The hospital, I murmured, trembling. Didn't react. Stumblingly to Theodore, I reached for my handbag and struggled with my phone. Is having trouble focusing on screen, my hands shaking while I dialed 911. The hours that followed were a haze. Rapidly arriving paramedics hurried me to. I recall the lively atmosphere in the Hiddle Hospital. Lights of the emergency department, the physicians and nurses posing queries to me, yet everything was unclear, so they looked at my head injury and provided me with added comfort. But the psychological harm was much. When I lay in the hospital bed, Worsey continued replaying while I stared at the ceiling. I was thinking about the vase at the time. Stephen's face contorted in rage. How had we handled the sound of the glass breaking? Reached this stage, how had the man married the man with whom I had intended to spend? They will spend the remainder of my life as someone who might harm me in this way. The door to my when the room opened, a policeman entered. Mrs. Anderson, a nurse, came next. I nodded and winced as the officer asked. My head ached from the action. I'm an officer. Garcia, I'm here to hear what you have to say. Regarding the event, the nurse assisted me sat up in bed and inhaled deeply. Before disclosing any information to the officer, he made sure to include all of the months of intensifying the dispute. By the time I was done, the tears in the vase were cop took a stream of tears from my face. Observe his serious expression. The husband has been placed under arrest. He has been accused of assaulting you. Must also submit a restraining order. The words hung in the air, taken in order. Arrested on charges of assault. The situation's truth struck me hard and I let out a sob over the following. The legal process proceeded swiftly in a few days. In court, Stephen was arraigned and I was a temporary restraining order was issued. I was recuperating in my hospital bed after I was aware of my head injury and concussion. Things would never be the same in my life again. Every day, family members came to see me, extending their assistance to my sister. Olivia remained at my side the most, assisting me with. She provided me with everything I needed, including assisted me in gathering my possessions from the Stephen, and I used to share an apartment. It was odd to stroll around the area that was once familiar, now filled with only traumatic recollections in mind. Discovered a tiny apartment close to Mathis, and I promptly moved in after lease from the medical facility. It wasn't a lot, but I also spent it on myself. Protracted attempt to make accommodations for every other people's requirements, and today for the first time I was able to concentrate for what seemed like forever. Without a doubt, here's the as I laid on the cold hard. I continued. My eyesight was so blurry that I could hardly see. The broken Stephen is standing over me. Fragments of the vase strewn all over my head ached, and I could sense the warmth. A drop of blood trickling over the side of my face. The space seemed unreal. Even though I was observing the action as it happened, emanating from Sophia, Stephen's body voice faltered, but he remained motionless to assist. He simply stood there frozen, unable to observe a mixture of remorse and incredulity in his eyes. But it was already too late. Attempted to talk, but what I said came out in a faint murmur. "What did you do?" Stephen moved his hands back a step. I didn't want to imply that my head was pounding, and I had trouble staying awake. I needed assistance to leave that place. Using all of my remaining strength, I lifted myself up onto my hands gradually and knees, my mind whirling every movement. The agony was unbearable, but I couldn't stay on the floor. I was able to get myself to stand, holding onto the counter's edge, for Stephen was still standing there to provide assistance. His face was pallid, as though he was unsure of why he had to go to the hospital to do. I spoke in a trembling voice, but he didn't answer. As I staggered to the door, I seized my purse and scarcely fiddled with my phone. Able to concentrate on my hands on the screen, I shuddered as I dialed 911. The hours that followed were a haze. Rapidly arriving paramedics hurried me to recall the bright hospital. Lights of the emergency department, the physicians and nurses posing queries to me, but everything was unclear, so they looked at my head injury and provided me with added comfort. But the psychological harm was much when I lay in a hospital bed. Vase continued replaying while I stared at the ceiling. I was thinking about the vase at the time. Stephen's face contorted in rage. How had we handled the sound of the glass breaking? Reached this stage, how had the man married the man with whom I had intended to spend the remainder of my life, as someone who might harm me in this way? The door to the room opened. A policeman entered. Mrs. Anderson, a nurse, came next. I nodded and winced as the officer asked. My head ached from the action. "I'm an officer. Garcia, I'm here to hear what you have to say." Regarding the event, the nurse assisted me, sat up in bed and inhaled deeply. Prior to informing the officer of what I did not omit any information during the months of escalating the dispute and the vase. When I was done, the tears worth cop took a stream of tears from my face. Observe his serious expression. "The husband has been placed under arrest, been accused of assault. You'll additionally must request a restraining order." The words "taken into custody" hung in the air. Accused of assault, the truth about thee was hit hard by the scenario and let out a sob. Throughout the following 3 days, my the court proceedings proceeded swiftly, and Stephen was in court. I was arraigned and given temporary injunction while I laid in the hospital bed as I recuperate from was aware of my life's concussions and head injuries. My family would never be the same again. Came to see me daily, bringing me sister Olivia stayed with their support. With me most, supporting me in she provided me with everything I needed, including assisted me in gathering my possessions from the Stephen and I used to share an apartment. It was odd to stroll around the area that was once familiar, now filled with only traumatic recollections in mind. Discovered a tiny apartment close to Vase, and I promptly moved in after lease from the medical facility. It wasn't a lot, but I also spent it on myself. Protracted attempt to make accommodations for every only other people's requirements, and today for the first time I was able to concentrate for what seemed like forever. Independently, a few weeks later, on the day that when Stephen was sentenced, I sat in the courtroom with my attorney at my side and Olivia, my hands shaking when I heard Stephen didn't glance at me during the proceedings. Once the judge's face was downcast, read the domestic allegations against him: assault, battery, and criminal activity carelessness. When the judge declared the 6 months in jail and required counseling for anger management, he felt a rush of relief that it was only about witnessing Stephen's punishment. About putting an end to that at last chapter of my life and assuming responsibility for me prospects following the punishment I underwent, leaving the courtroom with a lighter feeling. Stephen had made it more than I had in months. Options, and I could now create my own. In ensuing months, I poured myself into life from the ground up, into the advertising agency where I work. Pursuing new endeavors and rediscovering the love of creating, I got back in touch. Made new acquaintances with old ones and even began attending yoga courses to assist with the trauma and stress I had experienced at although small. My new flat was comfortable and I filled it with items that inspired me to for the first time in a long time. Feeling joyful, I experienced a feeling of calm, a feeling of I didn't require anyone else's belonging. Approval, I didn't have to do any extra work. I was putting myself last for everyone else's needs, sufficient as I was one afternoon when I was giving my balcony's plants some water. Pastime I had much to miss throughout my heard someone knock on the door during my marriage. I hesitated because I wasn't expecting anyone. Briefly before moving to respond to it, my heart fell when I opened the door. I froze, clutching the door, thinking it was Stephen. Gripped firmly as I stood there looking unkempt and exhausted, a shadow of the person I used to be. I could tell his eyes were begging, but I feel a rush of anxiety. "Sophia," murmured quietly, Horse, I have talked to you. My thoughts were racing after all that had occurred during the Attakis sentencing in the court case. I was unable to. I think he was brave enough to come here. However, I was aware that I had to hear what he said, if only to provide closure. I grudgingly moved aside to let him talk. He warily walked in, looking around. This apartment I recently moved into seems good. Despite his mumbling, I could see he was finding it difficult to put into words why he questioned my voice. Are you here, Stian? I had spent more money than I had planned on rebuilding my life after what he did took months, had completed, and he was now in missafe area under danger of disintegrating everything. He sat down and inhaled deeply. His hands interlocked below him on the couch. I came to apologize with my hands clasped together. Sophia, I am aware of the ways I can harm you, never take back, and I will be sorry for that. I made additional mistakes in the remainder of my life. More than I can ever describe, but I transformed. I've been attending therapy, and I've begun to see how poorly I handled. I kept quiet while I watched him. A part of me wanted to yell at Thea, believes that an apology could repair everything except for a different aspect of me. Was interested in seeing what he believed would occur next, but I lost everything that happened after you left. Stephen went on to break Kelly's heart with his voice. Moved in with the children and our parents. Hardly ever speak to me anymore because I lost my job. Following the legal proceedings, and I've been having financial difficulties, but none of that is more important than losing you. I kept my distance and crossed my arms. Thank you for the apology, Stephen, but it doesn't alter the fact that you struck me. You ruined all we owned. You can count on me to simply forget about that. Swiftly shook his head, saying, No, I don't. I hope you will pardon me because I simply would like to clarify that I have been working on a no, it's too late for me, Sophia. However, I wanted to let you know that I took a deep breath in an attempt to improve. Attempting to regulate the roiling emotions. This was the man I once had inside of me. Adored the man I had imagined creating life, but that man was no longer there. Substituted by a person who had caused it. Said softly, unimaginable pain, Stephen. I appreciate that you're making an effort to truly am, but we are unable to go too far back. Has occurred, I've moved on, and you need to go on as well. He appeared heartbroken. Ubi could see that he understood eyes. He realized that this was not a dialogue. Regarding it was about closure and reconciliation. I know he needed something that we both required. I wanted to tell you how, I muttered. I'm sorry, I wish things had gone differently. Distinct, I nodded, experiencing a feeling of fast finality descends upon me. So do I, Stephen. Got to his feet, his shoulders hunched into Sophia. I promise not to disturb you again. He walked because he needed you to listen to him. To the door, stopping briefly before returning to me. Look for yourself. I answered quietly, and with that too. He disappeared for a while after head parted, my thoughts racing as I stood by the door. Seeing Stephen once more had roused feelings I believed I had been buried, but as the minutes went by, I became aware that I felt less burdened than I had been enduring the suffering for a long time. The betrayal, the rage was beginning to subside. I no longer had Stephen in my life, and I might now at last proceed. Without the lingering shadow of our history over me, the ensuing weeks where I kept throwing full of healing, putting myself to work and taking on new tasks and gradually regaining confidence. That had been broken throughout when I got married. My coworkers helped me out. System, and I took pleasure in the small such as preparing meals for myself, furnishing my place and spending time with friends one afternoon. I obtained a court letter, and it was the divorce's completion. As I grasped the paper, I sensed a sigh of relief after reading Stephen's chapter was formally closed. And at last I was able to proceed totally unhindered. After several months, I was standing and staring a pot of water in my tiny kitchen. The air was filled with homemade soup, soothing scent of herbs, and the radio played gently, and the vegetables in the backdrop. My existence was now straightforward. However, it was mine, and that was sufficient. Had endured a great deal, but I had survived. I discovered a fresh iteration of I am more resilient, stronger, and at last as tranquil as the evening sun sank beneath the horizon, releasing a warm shine over my tiny apartment. I grinned. Didn't require another person to make me whole. Was complete by me, and for the first time I was grateful for the first time in a long time. I appreciate you reading about Rachel's adventure of fortitude and recovery. Remember to stay. Click the subscribe button. Informed about more compelling tales such as I'd love to know what you think of this, the remarks, and whether you found the tale. Please support it with a thumbs up. Helps us continue to share motivational material. I'll see you in the upcoming video.